we are honored to have two guests, one in studio and one on the phone. Christopher Hitchens, who has written a new book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And in studio we have Norm Weiss of First Church West, my new adopted church where I go on every Sunday. And last night we sat through an incredible debate, which was video streamed into us between Mr. Hitchens, although I understand it wasn't recorded last night, between Mr. Hitchens and William Lane Craig speaking up for the faith. And we have on our phones this morning Christopher Hitchens, and in studio, again, our pastor, Norm Weiss. Christopher, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm so glad you saw the debate. It was on Saturday night.
It was very yeah. Well, we saw it last night. I guess we've got a rerun of it. And Norm, courtesy of Norm Weiss, who is the head pastor of our church, and he brought it in. One of the things I like about Norm and about First Church West is they are very into the interchange of controversial and challenging ideas, whereas I'm sad to say that most of my colleagues in the faith community would rather preach to the converted. But
well, could I just say that
please.
When I first launched this book, the edition that's just out, by the way, if I can just quickly say, this is a paperback one.
Yes.
But the hardback came out a couple of years ago, and I told my publishers I didn't want just to do a book tour in liberal bookstores, but to take the tour south and to invite people of faith to debate me at every stop. And after a short pause, they almost all did, and I've had an amazing amount of hospitality and courtesy from religious and faith groups all the way through.
Does it surprise you, the willingness of the faith community to debate? Did that come as a surprise to you?
It did a bit, I have to say, because the reputation of at least some Christian groups, the moral majority, focus on the family, the more notorious ones, you might say, is that of being somewhat withdrawn and insular and, if not, intolerant.
Well, I must say that I sadly share that view with you. I'm going to ask you one question.
Yeah, please.
And then I'm going to defer to Norm because he is the expert here, and I don't want to dominate the time. But the one thing that for me was missing last night, I'm very curious. I came to faith late in life, probably about 10 years ago, and I'm 70, so that's pretty late in life. I'm kind of curious what your personal experience has been. In other words, from your earliest recollections through today, have you always had the same adamant I would call it an anti-faith position, or did you evolve? Have you changed at all in your thinking over your lifetime?
I would not like to say I hadn't evolved at all, but in the book itself, in the first chapter, I do describe how when I was quite small at school in England, where I was born, where religious education is compulsory, as is the attendance at religious worship compulsory in school. I used to rather enjoy the scripture classes, but one day the teacher made a huge mistake and made me realize that what she was saying was nonsense. And though I thought at the time I was the only one of the little boys who'd noticed this, as I grew older, I found there were many, many people who'd quite independently come to the same conclusions. The beauty of being a freethinker and a non-believer to me is that you don't have to go to meetings all the time to reaffirm it. You just run into like-minded people who've, with their own thoughts, come to the same conclusion.
What was it?
You don't have to force yourself to believe anything.
What was it that she said that turned you off?
Well, Mrs. Watts was her name. She was also our nature teacher. She used to take us out to look at flowers and birds and trees and so forth. That was in a very beautiful part of Western England. And one day she tried to fuse her two jobs, that of nature and scripture teacher, and she said, look, children, see how good God is, how loving he is. He's made all the grass and trees and vegetation to be green, which is the color, luckily, that's most relaxing for our eyes. And think how horrible it would be if instead the vegetation was orange or purple, how clashing it would be. And I didn't know. I was probably 9 or 10. I didn't know anything about photosynthesis or chlorophyll or evolution by natural selection or any of these things. And I still knew enough to know that she was talking nonsense, that the eyes adapt to the trees and not the other way around. Maybe you don't agree. I mean, I never know with these debates whether I'm debating with people who accept the theory of evolution or not. But without even knowing any of that, it seemed to me that she had just made a statement of faith that was, on its face, nonsensical.
What do you
and
make?
I was never able to recover from that.
It all started.
And I did regard when I was told things like Jesus casting devils into pigs and making the pigs commit suicide. I remember thinking these are not just fairy tales, but rather nasty fairy tales.
Norm, you have anything or any comments on that? You don't mind if I call you Christopher, do you?
No, you're very welcome to.
Okay.
Good morning, Christopher. How are you this morning?
It's a bit early to say. I'm not bad.
Well, I think that the point is well taken. A bad argument normally makes any position seem weak. And so many times people of faith will present arguments that are weak, especially, unfortunately, maybe with children. People present very simple arguments with the idea that the children won't be very aware. And so I think that we need to be very careful in what evidence we do present and how we present it, and we need to make sure that we're not giving rubbish to children because they figure that they're going to be naive and they won't think much. So I would agree with the need to present valid argumentation and keep away from things that are weak arguments for the existence of God.
But let me just say, Chris, let me do a follow-up.
I mean, you're quite right to say that, of course, but in point of fact, what Mrs. Watts said is pretty much Orthodox teaching. I mean, we should always be thanking God for creating the universe and making it so beautiful. I mean, that's surely, I mean, as Dr. Craig said last night, the purpose of our existence is the glorification of God. She didn't say anything that wasn't a perfectly sound religious argument. It's just that it seems to some of us, it will always seem absurd that first we're created by someone, we didn't ask him to do it, and then we're told you've got to spend the rest of your life praising me in return.
Let me.
I happen to think that's not just ill-founded factually, but a very grotesque, if not sinister, proposition.
But let me just ask you. Let's take that thing she said about the leaves. As we learned later in biology, when you cut things into little slices and put them under microscopes, and you take a look at cell structure. An amazing thing happens. There is an intricate order and a very consistent order to the nature of how cells develop and the way they look. It's all very organized. It's clearly not random. We're going to agree on that. Isn't that really an argument for the fact that there is, let's just call it, not to hurt, argue with your sensibilities, but let's just call it there's a non-randomness to nature. There was an order to nature that clearly has to be explained, and I don't know. How do you explain it?
Well, there is, it's obviously not, it isn't chaotic, because there are things about it that can be predicted, like the seasons, as well as you say, the cellular structure of leaves and trees and so forth, and animals. What we maintain, we materialists, is that this is the outcome, explicable, you can computer model it, of evolution by random mutation and natural selection. Some of the mutations are random. You can't say that they're chaotic, but they're not exactly pre-ordered either. Otherwise, you'd have no explanation for the rather sobering fact that of all the species that have ever occurred on Earth, we know that 99.8% of them at least have already become extinct, which doesn't argue for a very coherent design. Our own species very nearly became extinct in its early days in Africa. Pure luck that we did not. And now we know our kinship with other creatures, not just our fellow primates, through the study of the Human Genome Project, which shows that the ribbons of our DNA are full of junk as well as full of very interesting information. So we have to say that, yes, there is rather a lot of randomness in our makeup.
Norm?
Well, I think that what's interesting, he mentions the studies on the genes and DNA. Dr. Francis Collins, of course, is director of that. And he doesn't have a problem reconciling faith in God and faith in what has been discovered concerning the genes and science. So I guess my question would be, why do you think that the scientist that has headed up this project doesn't seem a conflict between, what has been discovered in DNA and faith in God? Faith, in fact, he's an evangelical Christian.
Yeah, I know and admire Dr. Collins, and he and I have had some exchanges on this point. I mean, for him, it's two different subjects, really. as Stephen Jay Gould on the other side, unbelieving biologist, said, science and religion belong in non-overlapping magisteria. You can be a physicist, for example. Some physicists are this way, and also be a Christian. What you can't do is say that the evidence of physics proves Christianity, because that just wouldn't work. It's just it can coexist in the same person. I would still say that my own opinion would still be that these things are radically incompatible. I mean, Dr. Collins in his memoirs recalls going on a hike in a high part of the country and coming across a frozen waterfall that had 3 streams frozen in it, and sinking to his knees and accepting Jesus. Well, that's fine, but there's nothing scientific about it.
Well, let me jump in here, and maybe you can help me with this. As I say, I came to Christ very late in life, and it was an experience, as it is with most people. You know, we Christians are very fond of sitting around and sharing our stories of, our what do we call our faith stories? Our testimony. And one of the frustrating things about these discussions is when you discuss, to me, faith is experiential, and when you discuss it from that point of view with somebody who's not had the experience, I think that's why there's such a tremendous lack of communication. But this is my observation, and I'm going to put it in the form of a question for you to try to make sense of for me, all right? In the course of the 10 years that I've been going to church and mingling very closely in the Christian community, I hear a lot of stories like my own, and my story was very simple. It hit me kind of in a flash. It made me realize that, contrary to what I'd always believed, I was not the center of the universe. I was not the most intelligent thing on earth. The most important thing it made me realize is that, quite frankly, I was not in control of my life. My life, as a secular person, had become consumed with controlling my life, events, how things were going to work out. And at a certain point, I was doing very well. I didn't come from a depth, as many people do. I had a wonderful wife, a wonderful family, a wonderful job, but I was not happy nor satisfied. And I realized that I could walk out of the door, and a tree could fall on my head, and there was no controlling things. Once and there's a phrase in Christianity called giving it up. It being control. Once I'd given it up, once I turned my life over to Christ, and this is where the question kicks in, a very interesting thing happened to me. I changed without trying to change. It changed me, in most cases, totally below my awareness. For example, my wife came to, I come from a theater background, so I'm big into 4-letter words, and every other word was the F word, even in front of my kids and all that. And early on into it, like 5 weeks into it, my wife came to me. She said, did you know you don't swear anymore? And I had made no effort. In fact, it came as kind of a shock to me when she said that. But that's just a small example of the changes that I experienced in my life and in the patterns of my life that I hear over and over and over again from people who have given it up and who have accepted Christ. Now, can you I'm very interested from your perspective how you account for that internal change that is not an effort. Every change I'd ever made, I'd make resolutions and all this kind of stuff. There's none of that involved. It changes you from within. What is your perception of that?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Well, there are 2 things. There are 3, actually. William James, in his Varieties of Religious Experience, says, and I think rightly, that the subjective experience of religion or of God is very real indeed to the people who have it. It becomes really an objective fact in their lives, not a subjective one. And who am I to disagree with that? It's fine by me as long as I don't have to hear about it. As long as you don't, in the name of Christ, suddenly start telling me that legislation has to be passed that suits you and that things have to be taught in school to my children. As long as you keep it to yourself, I genuinely, unsarcastically, wish you joy and happiness from it.
Second, but what cause? My question is,
I presume it would be as real to you if I said that I had made the profession, I'd given it up and said, I'll make the profession, there is only one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And that I told you that had completely changed my life. I'd given up drinking. I'd become a better person. You have to agree, if you say this for Christ, that it is as valid for any other religion, whatever that religion may be telling people to do. And let me tell you a story.
Okay.
Which is from the other night at Biola University, the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. A huge crowd came. Afterwards, there was a long line of people to have our books signed and shake our hands. A young man came up to me, took my hand, very sincere, very respectable-looking chap, took my hand and held it for slightly too long, and he said, "I used to be a really bad father." He said, "I used to be a really bad parent." I thought, oh, here it comes again. Someone else is going to tell me that until I accept Jesus as my personal Savior, I won't be happy either. And I said, okay, tell me about it. He said, I was a bad father, I was a bad parent. And then I realized that all this stuff about the afterlife and the life to come was absolute nonsense. There was only, and all religion was complete garbage. There was only one life to lead. We only had one life. And at that realization, I became a much better father and a much better husband. So, do you admit that it can work the other way around too?
I admit it can, but I want to bring it back to the question, which I feel inadvertently you didn't really touch on. I think all kinds of things happen random, but I'm talking about an experience of literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who've been through what I've been through, who the changes that occurred within them match the changes within me. It does not seem to be a random thing. And my question, which I guess I didn't make clear, but in your thinking, what accounts for that change? And it is a predictable change. I mean, there were very similar things that we all find. We find ourselves giving up a whole bunch of things that we were into before. We find ourselves doing a whole bunch of stuff that we hadn't done before. From a secular point of view, in your mind, what accounts for that change?
Well, there are secular phenomena of the same sort. I used to hear people say this about joining the Communist Party, so that it had utterly transformed their view of the world, their fellow creatures. They were leading more productive and useful and happy lives. All this kind of thing. It can happen that way too. And as I say, it's real to those who believe it. Well, it doesn't say anything about the truth of the doctrine, as you'll see from the point about the Communist Party or Islam. Or it is said, for example, that Louis Farrakhan's organization, the Nation of Islam, helps get young men off drugs and onto the straight and narrow when they're in jail or even before they go. That could possibly be true. I have a feeling myself it may be an overstated claim, but it wouldn't alter the fact that Mr. Farrakhan's Nation of Islam is a racist crackpot cult organization.
That's correct. So there are a lot of negatives that go along with that. Chris, let me put you on hold for a second. We got to do a little business here, and we will be back with our guest, Pastor Norm Wise from First Church West, and our honored guest, Christopher Hitchens. Chris, I'm going to put you on hold, and we'll be right back. All right, we are back with Dr. Norm Weiss, our pastor from First Church West, and Christopher Hitchens, the famous Christopher Hitchens, whose new book we want to help him promote here, God is Not Great. I don't agree with the message, but any book by Christopher Hitchens is obviously a book worth reading. Let me put Christopher back here. What? Okay. Are you there? Christopher?
Yes, that was very generous of you. You should tell him it's nice, cheap paperback now.
It is a nice, cheap paperback.
Available in fine bookstores everywhere.
Everywhere, right. Absolutely everywhere.
Okay, I'm done now.
All right. I wanted to. Oh, by the way, I just have one quick thing, and then Norm had a question for you. Yes. It was very interesting last night. Your debate opponent, William Lane Craig, several times. I don't know if this caught your awareness or not, but it was several times started to refer to you as Dr. Hitchens and caught himself in the middle and said, Mr. Hitchens. I almost got, I don't know if I'm paranoid, I almost got a feeling because of the repetitive nature of the pattern that he was trying to make a point with that. But I find it very curious that you've never evidently, do you have a doctorate in religious theory or any of these things?
No, I don't, absolutely not.
Because what interests me about that...
The highest, in a credential society, the highest I can go is I can say I'm an adjunct professor.
But what was behind your choice? This is obviously a big topic for you. So why would you not choose to go into advanced education? All the better to, more ammunition to shoot it down with. Why what was behind your choice not to get into it on a deeper level?
Well, my choice of journalism as a profession after university was, well, actually, I chose it before university. I always knew that it was what I was going to do. Is that you go on, the public goes on paying for your education and paying you to do it for the rest of your life. In any case, so you get the same result, but you don't have to sign up and pay dues.
The money is, you're telling me what the reason you didn't go for a PhD?
Well, no, I'm in a continuing education program known as the journalistic profession.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Whereas
Norm,
you get paid rather than have to pay to do it.
Norm, go ahead.
It's a twofer.
Okay. I had a question. Last night you were talking about referring to things concerning ethics and so forth, and the idea perhaps, and if you don't believe this would be fine, but it came across as though you believed that humanity was the highest form of intelligence, and I just wondered if you do believe that.
Well, I don't think we know of a higher form of intelligence than our own. I mean, of the species on the planet, the primates are the smartest, and we're the smartest of the primates. If there is a higher intelligence, we don't know of its existence.
Okay, so you are basically not sure if there could be a higher intelligence somewhere in the universe.
I won't say that its existence has been disproved. It would be impossible to disprove it. Probably we wouldn't be intelligent enough, just for one thing. But those who say that they know there is one and that they're guided by it are making an assumption that is unwarrantable from evidence that isn't available.
Well, I mean, you kind of, I think this respectfully, this kind of shoots down your argument. You're saying that there is no God, and yet when we ask you if there's a higher form of intelligence than man, you say you don't know. So
no, sorry, that's what the atheist position is on God too. We can't hope to say that there's a definite disproof. We can simply say there is all the alleged proofs are false.
Mm-hmm. How would you?
That's not completely true. There is a, because nothing's absolutely completely 100% true. There is a scientist, a very distinguished one, called Dr. Victor Stenger, who's recently produced a book called God: The Failed Hypothesis, in which, as a scientist, he argues that the evidence is now strong enough to say there really isn't any God. But up until now, the atheist argument has been to say that the arguments in favor are unsatisfactory or incomplete or fallacious.
Isn't this closer to an agnostic position? See, I always thought an agnostic says they don't know, and an atheist says there is no God.
The way that
agnostic would say we don't know, but if in our view, if you've shown there's no evidence for something, then you don't say you don't know if it's true. You say it's not. The agnostic position is essentially a cowardly one, a compromised one. I think we have the intellectual fortitude to say there being no decent argument in favor of the existence of God and there being no evidence at all of it, then we're willing to say there isn't one.
How would you respond, Dr. Mortimer Adler, former head of the philosophy department at the University of Chicago, in his book How to Think About God, in which he does present the classic defense of God, and of course, I just said this was written before he was a Christian or in any way connected to Christian faith. There's a whole group of philosophers who have said that no, based on logic, reason, rationality, going all the way back through the whole history of philosophy, there's been a whole group of people that said that based on reason and not because of any revelation, they think that in fact there is logical verification that there needs to be a first cause to make sense of things. And Mortimer Adler, of course, set that forth in that book very strongly.
The first cause argument is one thing. Sometimes it's known as deism. Though it needn't have any godlike word connected to it at all. But the plausibility of a first cause, our whole brains are shaped, as is our reason, to look for causes, to imagine that anything that happens must have a cause. It's a good thing. It's the reason why we make so many discoveries. It's also the reason why we often draw so many wrong conclusions, because people prematurely assume they've found what the cause is. And the more we know about the origins of the universe, the more we know how little we know. We know much less than we used to, because we know how much ignorance on the topic there now is. So to be able to leap to conclusions saying, well, there must have been a God who created it, is absurd. And to say, and by the way, this God cares about us and listens to our prayers and reveals himself and demands worship and glorification is absurdity on stilts. You can't get there from here.
Well, I can just in closing, it is frustrating because we have so little time with you, and obviously you are a guest that we would like to spend a lot of time with. Again, speaking firsthand.
Yeah, well, we can do this again.
Well, please. I really would like to. In fact, I was going to ask you, I don't want to impose, and I know you're in the middle of a book tour, but if you could slice out an hour any time in the future, I would love to get you on talking about what's going on in the United States, because I know essentially you're a political person, and I'm very kind of curious about how you feel about what's going on. But just in closing, I can only tell you the biggest thing that my faith has done for me, and I contrast it with, I'm suffering with some respiratory things here, Chris, so please bear with me, with my wife, who is not a person of faith. It gave me a great sense of appreciation of the gifts that I've had, and I find this with my fellow Christians. There is a sense of appreciation, the same things that they had before they were Christians, that they took for granted. When you start looking at things as gifts from God, or even warnings from God, or experiences that are not so pleasant, it gives you a greater appreciation of life. I'm going to give you the last word here.
Well, I appreciate very much being able to dialogue with you. I guess that from my perspective, there is a way to rationally believe in God, that we start with those rational philosophical arguments, and then we start looking for, how has this God revealed ourselves? And for me, the resurrection of Jesus Christ was critical. I did go through a period of time, in fact, in Bible college, when I wanted to be an atheist, but I wasn't able to pull it off. So I felt forced and compelled by the facts that I understood them to hold on to the Christian faith and so forth, but with struggle. So I appreciate you raising these questions, and I think they're good questions raised, and that's why we listened to debate last night at the church.
And again, the book is God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens, available in an inexpensive, as Chris points out, paperback edition. Christopher, I really appreciate your time this morning, and we will get back to you. How long do you think it'll be till you can talk about something other than your book?
Yeah, well, I naturally hope it'll be a little while, but do please keep me in mind.
I really would. I'd enjoy that.
Thank you very much for your hospitality.
We'll be back to you in the next month or two, all right? Thank you very much for your time this morning, Christopher Hitchens. Very interesting guest.